guest, Grover Whitehurst. He's a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. And Grover, we're talking today about the 5 top states who are operating with charter schools and whether or not charter schools are doing well or whether they're not doing well, how well they're competing versus public schools. And first, just for people who don't necessarily know, can you quickly tell us what a charter school is?
Sure. A charter school is a public school that operates outside the typical school district bureaucracy, and they're schools of choice. So parents can choose to attend a charter school, and again, they're publicly funded. They're public schools.
Okay, so in California, there are 941 of them. That is the state that has the most concentration. How are they doing versus the more typical public school?
Charter schools in urban areas have been studied a great deal. And we know that those schools, particularly in Boston and New York and Chicago, where most of the studies have been conducted, are doing a very good job. So they have lotteries because more families want to have their kids attend those schools in their spaces. And you follow the students who won and lost the lottery, and those who won and get in do a lot better academically, sometimes surprisingly large differences favoring the kids who attend the charter schools.
And we saw some of that, obviously, in Waiting for Superman. What makes the charter school preferable to the public school? Why do they do better?
Well, they, again, are free to operate outside the traditional school bureaucracy. So the principal can choose to hire and fire teachers, can set curriculum, can make for a longer school day, can do a variety of things that all together seem to make a difference, particularly for poor minority kids in urban areas.
So if they are doing better, and if in urban areas it shows that their test rates are higher and they keep kids in school longer, kids aren't just dropping out, they're not failure factories as some urban public schools are called, then why don't they get as much money as the public schools?
Well, that's a good question, and I think the administration and Congress ought to address that issue. Typically, they get about 80% of the funding per pupil of regular public schools, so they operate at a real financial disadvantage. They also have to get their own facilities, whereas the traditional public schools have buildings that were purchased years ago, so they just have to cover operations, whereas charter schools have to buy or rent the buildings and operate them. So there's a significant disadvantage. And again, it has to be handled, I think, federally, if there's going to be an even hand for charter schools across the nation.
Well, explain that to us. What is the solution here? If charter schools are doing well, what's the next step? And what do you mean by handled federally?
Yeah. Well, for example, the federal government could require states that receive Title I money, which is the big funding stream to help pay for the education of poor kids, could require those states to provide equitable funding for charter schools in exchange for the receipt of money. It seems like a reasonable quid pro quo.
David, stick around for a second, because David, Grover, stick around for a second, because David is shaking his head. Well, you hear what he's saying? Charter schools are doing better.
I've dealt with this issue for years, from the cartel on. I agree with just about everything he said, right up to the federal level. We have seen a Department of Education for 30 years that has failed, literally failed. And the last thing we want to do is centralize control in Washington, D.C. for the charter schools when issues of education are often regional and local. And that's what needs to happen. Example after example of this shows that when you move it down to the level where the schools have responsibility, and notice what he mentioned, accountability, responsibility. If you take that away from the system, you end up pushing it back into the very failure in our public schools.
Okay, Grover, can you respond to what he said?
Well, sure. I mean, I agree with that, except that equitable funding is traditionally a federal responsibility. And I think that the U.S. Department of Education can attend to that while keeping its hands off the actual curriculum and management.
But it never does, David.
Okay, but let me bring it, Sally.
We've seen that.
Well, let's talk about what's wrong with charter schools more broadly. I mean, we're having a how do we fix what's a really, problematic model. I mean,
but what's wrong with them, Sally? I mean, I'm curious. What do you think is wrong with charter schools?
Less money, better graduation rates.
Let me just ask Sally.
Number one,
Waiting for Superman presented a very compelling case about what's good about charter schools.
Yes, of course.
So what's
a very compelling and a very biased case.
Okay,
so first of all, it's been shown that charter schools cherry pick. So when your kid gets into a charter school instead of a traditional public school, not only have you already, as a parent, shown the initiative to try and get your kid into that school, which parent involvement we know is one of the largest factors in kid performance and student performance, but then you're ongoing, you're more likely to be involved and you're more likely to sort of invest in your child's education, number one. Number two, there's there's always an effect, what they call in science of, things being measured, sort of focused more at the beginning. So in other words, this is the new thing. Your kid's more engaged, the parents are more engaged, the teachers are more engaged, the schools are more engaged. Look, public schools in America have a problem that need to be fixed.
Yeah, so what can
but the answer isn't to take some kids out of the public schools and let the public schools continue to fail. Let's fix public schools so that they can work.
But what can the government or the local school do about parents who aren't engaged? I mean, if God bless you, if you have a parent who wants their child to get the best education and can do it through a charter school, great, right?
I mean, boy, how much time do we have? The problem facing, kids in, low-income, poor kids in urban areas is much, much larger than just what's wrong with schools. Okay, so we need to work on fixing schools. I agree there needs to be more innovation. I agree there needs to be more autonomy for particular schools. But what we also need to do is not say, well, we're going to basically pick the cream of the top and let them do well while we let them fail.
Let me bring in Grover, because he's the expert. Grover, are charter schools inherently unfair because of this reason?
Charter schools are not creaming the crop. They serve a disproportionately low-income and poor population. The entering scores of kids who enter charter schools are significantly lower than statewide averages. So they're just not creaming. And they are public schools. I mean, you've indicated that you want to fix public schools. These are public schools, and they operate with a degree of autonomy, and they seem in many circumstances to be working. That is one fix for the public school system.
In New Orleans, where they've moved towards charter schools, and ultimately, and we should be clear about that, one of the goals of the charter school movement is to move schools entirely towards privatization. There are about, if I'm not mistaken, the last count, 600 kids who literally don't have schools to go to because they have decimated. There aren't any more public schools. There's only charter schools or private schools. What do you do about that?
Grover, that's a problem. What's the answer?
Well, the charter school rate in New Orleans is 60%, so there certainly are public schools left. And I don't know what you're referring to. I don't think there's 600 students in New Orleans that don't have schools.
I'll be happy to provide you with the data.
Good.
I'd actually like to see that data because
write that down.
I'll use New Jersey, Grover, as the example, which started back in about 2005, 2006 when I worked on the school construction fund fraud and exposed a bunch of it there. What we found in Newark, New Jersey, for instance, was that when charter schools applied across the state for their charter, they were denied for leaving, literally, and we have the proof of this, and it's on record, on video, and in print, of being denied for missing a line in the application of an 87-page application. This is the problem. This is a power play by the unions, and I'll back this up. The NAACP is part of the fault in New Jersey in this specific case. Janice Harris Jackson, chair of the NAACP's Education Committee in New Jersey, sent an email, which I was sent, in which she states their national policy against anything but public schools, and they fought charter schools on the basis of simply being in line with the unions. It's our kids that are the issue. It's solutions, and when we see that we throw less money and accountability in a charter school or a choice situation, that's when we get a system that works for the kids, not for the institution, not for the rubber rooms, not for the administrative bloat.
I smell a longer segment.
One of the challenges.
Last word, Grover, go ahead.
One of the challenges for charter schools is that the most frequent authorizer of charter schools is a local school district with whom the charter schools compete. And so, and one of the significant issues here is that parents want to choose, and there's a lot of research indicating that when parents choose, they're happier and their kids do better. And charter schools are a way to do that. And I think we need to encourage the growth of the good ones.